Hey, my name is Mr. X. Welcome to the Extreme Channel. We are giving away $1,000 statues to you guys. If you want to know how to win one, stay tuned for later in the video. First of all, I want to introduce you, or let you introduce yourself. I'm Mr. X, and most people watching probably know that simply because you tuned into my channel. But today we have a very special guest, and I have a plethora of questions for this guy on so many levels. And in full transparency to everybody, we have not spoken. We don't really know each other. We just, I know what I've read online. So with that, other than people reading the description in the intro, David, they probably don't know much about you. So why don't you give us a little elevator speech about David? And then I'm going to start diving in right away with some questions because I love your history. So.
Cool. Yeah, I've been working in the toy industry since 2003. I started as a designer for McFarlane Toys. I worked there for about 3 years or so as both a designer and sculptor, and then I moved on to Hasbro for a couple years. 11 and a half years after that, I worked at NECA, mostly doing sculpting, some designing. And as of 2021, I went out on my own and did my own company, Creative Beast Studio, full time. Right now, we're specializing in dinosaur action figures, and hoping to expand into the sci-fi market with the Cyberzoic line that I have coming up soon.
Very cool, yeah. And as a little bit of background, so David's one of the people on David's team reached out to me, and they said, "Hey, would you be interested in this?" And I initially went to Creative Beast Studio, which we're going to talk more about later. And some of the products, and the products were really interesting. They're not necessarily my forte, but then I started reading more about David, and this is what got me. And I think the viewers of my channel will really get this. These are, he mentioned he worked with McFarlane and Hasbro, but these are some of the projects he's worked on, which just absolutely blew my mind. Obviously, with McFarlane, Spawn, we all know that.
Oh yeah.
But, Dragons, Fantasy, Simpsons, Predator, Aliens, Terminator 2, Pacific Rim. And there's a whole bunch more of that. And I was just like, then I started to get really interested. I'm like, wow, that's my forte. That's my passion. And I think David gave a very simplified version of some of his background. And what's interesting is that based on your education, I think you and I kind of grew up in the same era.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, and to me, that was one of the greatest eras, especially when you get into some of these creatures and intellectual properties that we own. So I want to just kind of start like back in you were born, I'm assuming you were born in the 70s or 80s. Is that fair to assume?
Yeah, 79. So
Okay.
So I was a child in the 80s and then a teenager in the 90s. To me, that was an ideal time to grow up if you're a creative person, because in the 80s you had the whole 80s toy boom, and then in the 90s you had the big video game revolution going on. So it was a huge influence on my creativity and what I wanted to do.
And I have teenage children, and I always tell them, you guys have no idea what it was like. So growing up, we read comic books and had to visualize what was happening, where they get to see it on the cinematic film, stuff that we never thought was possible.
Yeah.
When we saw, Christopher Reeve fly, we were like, wow, that's amazing, and it's nothing compared to what they see there. So to your point, I think that really spawned the creativity in that generation.
Yeah.
Because they started introducing stuff, but you had to use your mind to go to that next level.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, to follow up on the 90s, comic books were a big deal for me back then too. And I was super into Image comics, especially like Spawn and Wildcats and things like that. I was so into it that I wanted to go into that profession. So when I went to art school, I majored in sequential art, intending to go into the comic book industry. So that's where everything started for me.
So let me ask you this. I was big into comics kind of around the same time, huge collection. I would spend, before I turned 16, I'd have my mother take me to, it was called Dragon's Lair. That was the name of our local comic book shop. And we would, spend our allowance on, from the age of 8 to, 13 or so. And then I stepped out of comics for about 25 years, and I'm back in them now, mostly through, slabs and omnibus and things like that. And it's fantastic, especially with collectibles, adding that to the mix. So what do you think of the comic books today compared to back then when you were growing up, from a creativity and storyline aspect? I'm curious. I have my opinion. I'm curious to hear yours.
Well, what's funny is I don't follow modern comics, I'm just catching up on the ones from the '90s right now.
Okay, all right.
So like right now, I'm reading the Death and Return of Superman. So
Okay.
like like yeah, so I'm not really sure what the difference is as far as like the modern comics go, to be honest.
Okay. One thing I've noticed is I still love reading the old storylines, but I love the artwork now. And not saying I dislike the artwork then, but I mean, where there I would spend a little bit of time on each panel. Here
Hmm.
I'll spend a minute looking at a full page layout,
Oh
just trying to capture the details.
yeah, yeah. I do follow a lot of comic book artists on Instagram, and I see their work pop up all the time, and just I'm amazed by what they can do now. I can only imagine having a whole book full of that.
Yeah. It
Yeah, it's really cool. I think every creative industry has really reached a level that we haven't seen before. I mean, as far as comics, video games, toys, all of it. Yeah, I mean, all of the creatives are just constantly building on what came before, and we're kind of at this. I don't know if it's a peak, but it's definitely, I would say, like the highest that I've seen it as far as like skills and different types of things
yeah.
that go into it. Whatever it is that goes into it, like as far as the coloring, the drawing, all of that. I mean, it's really interesting to see all of that constantly improving.
And I agree with you. I think one thing, and as much as I like to see it, I don't like to see it, like AI generated images. I mean, they're really cool. Don't get me wrong, but I think that
Hmm.
takes away from creators significantly, and I don't like that at all. But
Yeah,
some of the stuff they come up with, to your point, maybe like you kind of said, we're at the precipice. Maybe that's the next step. Which is bad for creators, but
personally don't care for the AI art. I mean, I you can usually spot it pretty quick, and it feels there's some sort of disconnect there for me. When you see somebody doing something by hand, or just as an artist, there's usually a certain style to it, like a personal expression to it, and that's really what I connect with. The AI art is probably going to work fine for like very large companies who are not trying to invest too much in art and things like that. But I think that with that being part of the industry now, it's going to kind of solidify the more creative side of it, as like being a bit more supportive and maybe more collaborative to show what the potential is for that.
yeah, or even circumvent it before Skynet takes over, and we're all gone anyway.
Yeah. It's so funny how that's usually where we go, right? Like the AI is definitely going to be bad for us. I think it'll have its place. I mean, I'm not like anti AI necessarily, but as far as art goes, I just don't feel like art is something that can be replicated with machines. I think that's something that humans bring that can't really be done by anything else. Yeah, we'll see where it falls. I mean, we usually have some sort of technological disruption in the art community, like every 10 or 20 years. And
That's fair.
we're still here, and we're still adapting, and we're still finding ways to use those tools for our advantage. It'll
That's
be
fair
interesting
enough.
to see how it shakes out.
Yeah, so I agree with you. It's I remember a story, and I promise I have a point. So you think of like the way cinema started affecting the way the world works. Where prior to that, it was written word and novels, and but that's
Hmm.
still huge, still very extremely popular. I would argue more popular, but I do think you need to find ways to circumvent it. Like, for example, we always got to be thinking, from an artistic standpoint, a creator, standpoint, which we're both creators. Think of what's coming down the road. Like Blockbuster CEO turned down the chance to buy that mail-in place called Netflix for 50
Hmm.
grand.
Right,
Uh,
right.
do you remember flying in the 1990s and early 2000s? Do you remember what you would do when you taxied and before you took off? You'd always read this one magazine. Do you remember what it was called?
For me, it was called Toy Fair.
Okay, but that was in the seat. Sky Mall. Sky Mall was huge.
Okay, no, I wasn't a
Then the
fan.
FAA changed the rules of devices, electronic devices,
Hmm.
during taxi and takeoff. And the second they did that, nobody reached for SkyMall anymore. They would, play on their BlackBerry or a
Right.
video game, and
Yeah.
SkyMall went bankrupt. So I still think that we need to look, to your point, something's going to happen with AI, and I don't think it'll be cataclysmic, as you said. Something big happens every 20 years, and creative content is still highly needed.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember back when I was a teenager hearing about Photoshop, and there's all this concern about, oh no, we're all of the illustrators are going to lose their jobs because they can't paint with paints anymore, and that's the first time I remember a disruption, and then it happened again with the digital sculpting in the mid to late 2000s, and yeah, I mean, it's just like every 10 or 20 years, there's something. I mean, it's kind of inevitable when you have technology constantly moving forward. It's going to affect something. But I think it usually settles into place. I think the issue is that everybody's so quick to predict the future without having enough information. They're not allowing things to just kind of take shape and just assuming it'll work out. Everybody wants to be the one who predicted something. So
Mhm.
there's there I think it's just part of our culture, isn't it? It's like predicting the weather. We have to predict everything else too. And it's like, well, you might have a handle on the weather part, but the rest of it's we're just gonna have to be okay not knowing.
Yeah. Well,
So
and I think 2020 taught the world that lesson, right?
yeah, exactly.
Whatever you
Yeah.
have
Well,
planned. So, and
yeah.
I'm going to go back to something you just said, because this was on my list. So, sculpting, you learned it. You learned how to sculpt, and I'm going to get into your current. I don't know if you do it for your current line or not, but I'll get into that later. But right now, I'm
Mhm.
kind of curious. Did you learn traditional sculpting first, or did you go straight into digital, or do you do both, or kind of talk to me about that?
I only digital sculpt.
Okay.
I work with a lot of. I mean, I'm sorry. I only traditionally sculpt.
Okay.
I work with digital sculpt. There was a point in my career where I kind of had to make a decision. Do I pursue my business, or do I learn how to sculpt digitally for other people? And obviously, I learned how to run a business instead, which I don't regret. And I've been able to work with a lot of fantastic digital sculptors. I've been able to learn from them and just, gradually, you know, get to know that type of method. I think next year I'll probably have a bit more time set aside to actually do it myself, because it is something that I'm interested in doing. But it's required so much of my time and attention to set the company up and keep it going, and try to establish myself, that I felt like that was a priority. But uh, I'm very familiar with traditional sculpting. I kind of taught myself while I was in college, because I didn't
Okay.
study it in college. I studied design and illustration. Like I was saying before, I started off in sequential art, so there's a lot of design and illustration involved with that.
I just want to follow the flow of this. So you started Creative Beast Studio in 21, is that right?
No, no, actually, that's when I left my job. I was working at NECA and running Creative Beast Studio at the same time.
Okay.
Uh, Pretty much the whole time I was there. It's just that the first part of it was just model kits. I was doing a lot of dinosaur model kits. That's how it was up until 2016, when I did my first Kickstarter for the Raptor series, and that's when things started changing, and I started seeing this as an opportunity to start a toy company. So I followed up with two more Kickstarters, and each one was just creating more momentum. And now I'm at a point where I want to launch my own intellectual property using that platform, and using that uh, foundation of the dinosaurs.
And this is great. You're like setting me up for all these questions we haven't talked before. So I'm really, really curious, going through your background in education, a lot of comics, a lot of fantasy, mythical type stuff. And then all of a sudden, not only are you full blown into dinosaurs, but one of the things, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I took away is that you're very much about the scientific accuracy of the dinosaurs.
Yes,
And I didn't see
absolutely.
that anywhere in your background. I didn't see, paleontology study or, loved dinosaurs as a kid. Was it, when you were 14 and you went to Jurassic Park for the first time, or what spawned the dinosaur route?
No, no, I'm not a Jurassic Park person. I was I guess I was probably 13 or 14 when that came out, and I was totally into other stuff at the time. I was in the comic books, I was in the video games, but I barely noticed the movie. I thought it was cool, but it I think around that time is when I really started getting into Star Wars.
Okay.
So it was there was no comparison at that point. My childhood experience with dinosaurs was really Dino Riders.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I remember
Yeah,
them.
so that was I think I was around 8 or 9 years old, and I I had quite a few, but I was just fascinated by because to me those looked realistic,
Mm.
and I think the intention was that they were accurate. So that was a big influence for me. That was always one of my favorite toy lines, along with Transformers and He-Man, and I just kind of carried some of that inspiration through. Before that, I was already into dinosaurs anyway. I had like dinosaur uh, books, with a bunch of illustrations and things like that, and I had other animal books too. So the animal thing has always been with me. Part of doing the dinosaurs is like kind of getting familiar with that market and eventually getting into doing mammals and modern day animals and things like that, because I think that the action figure industry doesn't really treat them as subject matter. They treat them as uh, accessories. Sometimes mouse the story that I'm working on now, Cyberzoic, puts wildlife as the main focus of the story, and we as humans are just trying to figure out how we fit into nature by way of all these different types of animals.
Back to your cyberzoic line. So, cyber, is there some type of futuristic element with the dinosaurs or not?
Yes, yes. So it takes place in a distant future on another planet, and so basically, in a nutshell, the concept is that a very small population of our species exists on this other planet. They have limited resources, but they're mostly scientists, and they're not heavily armed. They don't have a lot of other resources, like as far as defense goes, and they have to kind of survive in this hostile environment. So they basically have everything they need to uh, create things through genetics. So what they do is they kind of have this library of wildlife from Earth that goes back millions of years, and they're basically just choosing whatever animals can help them survive.
Oh,
And
that's cool.
that's why we end up with uh, basically the mightiest animals that have lived on Earth to combat the threats of this planet, which are what we call dragons. They don't want us there. So the story picks up about 300 years after they've been there, and the humans have basically won. They're taking over the planet. They're terraforming it. They're introducing invasive species, and so it calls into a lot of things like like, do we deserve to take over another planet? And we're taking over at a fairly high rate. A lot of their animals are now going extinct because of us. We on the other hand are just thriving. That's the general premise. And once there is peace, once people have survived, and once we've established a new population, what happens? We've got no one to fight, so we start fighting ourselves. So that's where the story picks up, is with the first conflict, with the first war.
Okay. Yeah, this is
That's where it
really
goes.
important for viewers because what people who weren't alive in the 80s or they were too young in the 80s, they don't understand is that when different toy lines or action figures came out, they had to have storylines behind them, extensive storylines.
Oh yeah,
What a
yeah.
lot of people don't understand is a lot of the characters that we love in cartoons and movies, they started as action figures with, to
Hmm.
your point, these type of storylines because we would purchase the action figures as children or sometimes even as adults because of those storylines in conjunction with the characters. But nowadays it's like people think of Transformers, they're like, oh, that's because there's movies about them. It's like,
Yeah.
no, they started as action figures, and
Yeah.
countless lines. I mean,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
and I love that you're doing that. But your current line, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's just really dinosaurs. It doesn't have that type of story behind it, or does it?
No, no, no. They're meant to represent scientifically accurate dinosaurs. Basically, that was something that I felt I could contribute to this industry because it was lacking in it. We do have the Jurassic World, the Jurassic Park stuff, but I feel like the target audience is a bit young and they're a bit stylized. So I wanted to bring something that was a bit more based on reality, more based on scientific accuracy. Now, obviously, we don't know what color most of them were, so that has to be sort of uh, uh, just guessed. But that's part of the fun, right? With dinosaurs, like we know some bits, and the other bits we have to just kind of speculate. So that's it's a lot of fun. But yeah, it is just dinosaurs. And that being said, I always was hoping that it could be the foundation for something more. And that's what Cyberzoic is. And getting back to your question about the robot aspect of Cyberzoic, is what does Cyberzoic mean? So the story, like I said, picks up with the first human war on this planet. It's over this new species that is non-organic. They're artificial life forms that we created, basically AI. And there's a whole philosophical concept behind it. Like, are they descendants? Are they going to replace us? Are they going to live alongside us? There's all these things to explore. So basically, like, you have your Mesozoic, your Cenozoic era, and this is the Cyberzoic era.
It's funny. I remember, I don't remember what age I was, but I remember I was in school and one of the teachers stated that about dinosaur colors. They're like, we have no idea. They could have been purple with pink polka dots and zigzags and on their skin. And they explained why, I mean, we model them now close to what reptiles are and other, similar skin. But that blew my mind. And I've never forgotten that people really don't know. A T-Rex could have been the same color as my shirt, Probably wasn't, but
right. I mean, I think there are ways to speculate based on what we see nowadays, but there's still a lot that we can't know. There's a few instances where they found feather pigments in certain ones, but I think it's just a handful. So most of it we just guess.
Yeah, based off alligators. One thing I love about this is it, just as much as it is there to purchase the products, there's tons of educational stuff on here. I was on here for 5 minutes and I found out like 5 things I didn't know. Like, how many horns does a Triceratops have? That blew my mind. I was sure it was 3. I mean, but yeah, so make sure to check out his website, everybody. It's not only for some of the cool products, which we're going to talk a little bit about, but also, like I said, half of it's about education of the dinosaurs, which I think kind of goes back to what you were saying. You're in this for that reason, and I like that a lot.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that I want to kind of glorify and promote is natural history in its truest form. I see it a lot. You see a lot in Hollywood and popular media. It has to get distorted. We have to have our animals turn into monsters and things like that so that we can sell. But I don't think that's necessary. I think that we can treat them like animals and present them that way. Like to me, and I'm super familiar with pop culture. I'm super familiar with fiction, everything. Natural history is way more inspiring to me than anything we've created. So I'm approaching it from that standpoint and trying to, bring that to this story and to my work and everything like that.
Jumping subjects here. So most of your current pieces are about 1/18th scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Do you plan to continue that with the future line, the Cyberzoic line?
Yeah, because it's a really good scale. It was a scale that originally became popular with Star Wars, obviously, and it expanded into or Real American Hero GI Joe, and and it's just kind of kept going since then. Uh, and the reason is because you can get a pretty decently articulated human figure plus vehicle sized accessories. So that works well with the dinosaurs because you can get a wide range of species and have them all be in scale with each other. Sometimes I'll go outside of that a little bit, like I'll do like a 1/35th, so we have
Mhm.
smaller animals. And like we that way we can bring in I say smaller animals, smaller figures of larger animals.
Yeah.
So like if we wanted to do like a big brachiosaurus, let's say at 1/35th, it wouldn't be so expensive that nobody could afford it. Like it would still be attainable. And on the flip side of that, sometimes I do smaller animals at a larger scale, like the raptors are. They're only 6 feet long in real life. You do them at 1/6 scale, they end up being a 12-inch figure. So that's a nice hefty figure, and with you can put a lot of detail and articulation. So 1/18th is the main scale, but every once in a while I'll play around with the other scales, just depending on what the species is. So
So in kind of the comic collectible world, which I'm sure you're very familiar with as
hmm
well, there's two collectors and some that kind of merge both. And one is like statue collectors who buy statues with static poses. And then the other one really fall into the realm of like 1/6 scale. Hot Toys is a big brand for that.
hmm
Because again, very, very similar articulation, a lot of posing, a lot of, stuff together. So what's your typical customer? Is it adults? Is this a child? Or is there a market for children for this? What's your kind of your target audience?
my target is adults, and even on the packaging, it says recommended for ages 15 and up.
Okay.
Um, I know of plenty of people who are younger than that really love the toys as well. I just like the assumption is that if you're young, then maybe you'd be just as happy with a Jurassic World figure, and those are less expensive, obviously. Um, but yeah, my target audience is intended to be adults, and the adult collector market has become so big in the last 10 or 20 years, and I think it's a lot because of our generation. Like we just kept everything that we loved from when we were kids, and we just kind of grew up with it, right? So
Well, and don't
um,
forget, we finally got money. As a kid, you didn't have money like this. So
that helps so much. Yeah, yeah. I can't tell you how many video games I'm going back and playing from the '90s now because they couldn't get them back then.
yeah, yeah, or the comics.
But
So
and yeah, the comic, going back and reading all the comics. Yeah, uh, yeah. So I mean, it's a good time to try it, I think, and plus, one of the things that I think it helps with this, having a chance of being successful is the fact that uh, uh, animal anatomy in the action figure industry is not a priority. It has to be humans because there's so many human characters, obviously. So, finding people who can do that is a bit of a challenge, and I'm always trying to find the best people. They don't have to come from this industry; it could come from anywhere, and I just want the best people. And I want the most accurate, most realistic, versions of everything. We're not trying to stylize anything. So that I think is something that most companies aren't willing to invest in, as far as like having competition or whatever. So I think that's helped us, kind of stand out as having something unique.
well, and just some context for some of the viewers. So I'm friends with a lot of sculptors, but they almost always do humanoid type characters.
hmm
So like they
Right.
will literally, if they're sculpting a leather coat on someone, they will have someone they know stand with a leather coat on to give them
hmm
reference, and we can't do that with dinosaurs because they're not here. So
Yeah.
it's much
Yeah.
to your point. It's much harder and difficult to find people that can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm fascinated by animal anatomy, and back when I was at McFarlane, I wanted to work on sculpting the dragons. I had already designed a few at that point, but I had just started sculpting there, and I was getting like beginner projects, and I was trying to think of ways that I could kind of break into the dragon sculpting, and I had an idea. I'll just sculpt a dinosaur in my spare time and show them that I can do something similar. And so that's what I did, and I ended up sculpting the Eternal Dragon from series 2 or 3, I forget, series 4 maybe. But anyway, it worked, and that kind of put me on the path of like sculpting creatures, because I ended up sculpting a lot of creatures for them by the time I left, and I try to get my hands on whatever creatures I could after that. You know, I was like, even at Hasbro, like I sculpted Jabba the Hutt and Dewback,
That's
and
cool.
you know, at NECA there was the Pacific Rim stuff was a blast to work on. That was some of my favorite stuff. Bunch of Predator stuff, Godzilla's, like just always trying to work on creature stuff.
And I see some of your like mech creatures, the drawings you have on your website. It's almost like, and I don't know if they came before or after, but that's like a, you know, you talk about the Pacific Rim, you probably take inspiration from everything, or they get it from whatever. But yeah, like the ones with guns on their back, those are pretty cool. Is that part of the Cyberzoic line or no?
Which ones are you looking at right now?
So I'm looking at the robots, just the drawings.
It might that might just be some random robot stuff that I put up there. I
At
can't
one time.
remember, but I mean I love drawing robots just as much as I do love drawing animals. I'm split right down the middle with that stuff. Like I'm just as much of a fan of dinosaurs as I am like Transformers. so
Okay.
so
All
yeah,
right.
all of cool.
So I have to ask you then, what's your opinion of the Bayformer movies? And not the movies. Let's not attack anyone. The design of the characters in the Bayformer movies.
I I I like them quite a bit.
Okay.
I'm an old school Generation One fan. You know, uh, my whole take is that I've been following Transformers ever since ever since it started. I took a break in between and then picked it up in college when Beast Wars was going on, and Beast Wars kind of showed me like you can appreciate Transformers in different forms, right? So they don't always have to be blocky vehicles. They can be a lot of different things. And then after that, we had Armada, we had Energon, we had Cybertron, and so on and so forth. So there was like iteration after iteration, and all of them had some cool things going on. All of them had like a different style, and there was something to appreciate with each line. So when the Bayformers came out, that first movie, 2007, I was I was I think that's the most excited I've ever been for a movie. Seeing
Okay.
live action Transformers, and I remember having this little tiny MP3 player, little Zune, and it had a 1-inch screen on it. And I had downloaded the trailer to the Transformers movie, and I would just sit there and watch it when I was at work, just on this
Okay.
little 1-inch screen. I just couldn't wait to see it. I ended up seeing it, I think, 7 times in the theater. So, so
So
yeah, I would say I'm a fan of those movies. The only one I didn't like was I think the fifth one, the
yeah,
the
the
Last
last
Night.
night I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that one. Like I'm not upset about it. I just didn't get into it. I just This is too much that didn't make sense. Like I have a high tolerance for it, but that was a little too much.
So the reason why I asked is I've owned some of the large $2,000-3,000 statues. I've owned tons of them.
Yeah,
Some
those
are
are cool.
Generation One because that's what I grew up with, and some
Sure.
were the Bayformers, and I loved
Hmm.
both. To
Yeah,
your
same
point, I
here.
think the designs were incredibly were awesome. Real life
Hmm.
versions. Um,
Hmm.
I love the first movie. I thought that was fantastic. To me, it started to go downhill after that to where once it got to 4, I couldn't stomach it. But
I actually like four.
yeah, but in the collecting community, there's so much controversy around Bayformer versus G1, and to
Hmm.
me, I'm like, why can't you like both? I like both.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I think good design is good design. It doesn't matter, if it came from something else. You don't have to. I mean, you can compare it. It's kind of fun to compare, but at the end of the day, it's a completely different world, a different design language. You're not. you shouldn't be putting those two in the same story. That's for sure. So
Yeah.
so yeah. I mean, I've seen pretty much every iteration of Transformers. Big fan of all of it, really. And there's a few here and there that kind of missed the mark, but most of them are really good.
So as we're closing up here, David, what else can you tell us about Creative Beast Studio, about yourself? So right now you have, I saw over 92 different products on there. When do you anticipate the Cyberzoic line to begin? Is that going to be this year, next year? Do you have a time frame on that?
Well, we're gonna start the Kickstarter a week from today. Today's Tuesday. It's gonna be next Tuesday on October 3rd.
Okay.
And you know, we're gonna lead off with a somewhat modest offering with a big dragon and a saber-toothed tiger
Okay. Cool.
and an Allosaurus, and then the Allosaurus and the saber-toothed tiger will come with they'll be offered with a human character plus armor, and you know, if that gets funded, then we have a lot of stretch goals planned. So you know, once everything's said and done, we'll know better like what to expect as far as when things come out. But I'm pretty sure we can have the first wave out within about a year,
Okay.
and then follow up like maybe every 4 to 6 months after that with more stuff.
So for everybody watching, I'm going to have a direct link to the Kickstarter in the description of this video. So like I said, definitely check out the site, not only the current products that are offered, but some of the not only the history about David, which is pretty cool, which is what got my attention, but those learning facts. I mean, just really cool stuff about current, or not current dinosaurs. They're not current anymore, but the non-Cyberzoic line. But it's pretty neat. So I'm going to have a link there. They're not affiliate links. That means if you click on them, I don't even know. I get no kickback, so I'm not trying to sell you on something. It's something worth checking out for sure. I quite enjoyed it. All right, well, I really appreciate David. Like I said, in full transparency, I'm sure what I knew about you is probably what you knew about the Extreme channel. Very little knowledge, but I think that's what's great when you have, I'm a creator of content. You're a creator of a lot of different things to really meld together and get. It's funny how we see the world very similar, but we do very different things but we're all about collectibles, and I think that's great. So as we try to grow this channel, we like to reward you guys for watching and subscribing. So because of that, every 5,000 milestone when it comes to subscribers, we give away a couple $1,000s worth of statues. We've actually given away over 20 statues. To win one was easy. First, you got to be subscribed to the channel. You'll get bell notifications when videos drop. Each video that drops, you want to make a comment on those videos. We pick a random video, we give away statues based on a comment. You can say whatever you want. The more videos you comment on, the higher your chances are to win. I appreciate your time. Again, everyone, please check out the links in the description below and see if it's anything that interests you. It definitely interests me. So, David, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. Appreciate it.